Community Perspectives of Humanitarian Programs. For context, the Philippines is a hotspot for human-induced and natural disasters. The anti-dictatorship social movement built on the foundations of community organizing and the People Power Revolution in 1986 has made it the global capital of civil society organizations. It comes as no surprise that community organizing and disaster response and the ensuing locally led response has been established in the Philippines for decades. Regional disaster response networks, development NGOs, and people organizations have been responding to disasters even earlier than the eruption of Mount Pinatubo in 1991 in the context of participatory development. International NGOs stood in solidarity as local organizations led the disaster response. It is surprising that the same international organizations and international NGOs now cry that local organizations have no capacity to lead disaster responses. In discussing the community perspectives, let's start by looking at the different actors in a humanitarian response. We have the donor, the responding agency, and the community. With desperate communities requiring aid to survive, donors with their own domestic constituency to please, and the responding agency that serves as a channel to deliver the aid, the basic model is already filled with imbalanced power relationships. If we want to talk about community empowerment, we have to be sensitive of the power imbalances. Power relationships determine the quality of participation, accountability, inclusion, and even resilience. If we do want to have a community engagement process that leads to participation and empowerment, it is imperative that the frontliners of those with the power of the purse are sensitive to their power. This includes not only program coordinators and facilitators, but also monitoring and evaluation officers, security officers, and admin and finance officers. I myself have seen partnerships jeopardized when finance staff bully local organizations under my radar. We talk about accountability in humanitarian standards in terms of upward accountability and downward accountability, yet this model itself is centric to the responding agency perception of accountability and power relationships. From a community perspective, the stakeholders are numerous, the power relationships become complex, and the impact goes beyond the timeline of a project. The LGU serves as a coordinating body for the humanitarian response, but the common partisan and patronage politics become highly active during a disaster response. Other stakeholders, such as some private sectors, see disasters as an opening for their commercial interests. When desperate, the community prioritizes that the responding agency does not leave. Minor complaints can be mentioned, but major issues are hardly raised because they know that the responding agency can select another community to become its beneficiary. Aside from the vertical relationship, the community is also mindful of horizontal community relationships. Despite the battle cry of do no harm, having beneficiaries and non-beneficiaries in the community always create a level of conflict that the community internally mends. Aside from the power relationships with the responding agency and the donor, the community also struggles with the continuing power dynamics that hinder community participation in the response and their empowerment. This includes the patronage politics that influence not just coordination but the actual response, the development aggression by some private sector and government, and the red tagging of communities and their organizations who are active in advocacy and rights claiming. Furthermore, the creation of multi-stakeholder platforms in the name of inclusivity and the humanitarian development peace nexus becomes a double-edged sword. While it invites more representation and voices, a multi-stakeholder platform only reinforces existing skewed power relationships in a community. Do not expect the community to immediately speak out against local officials, the rich private sector, or the responding agency that serves as their lifeline. a community must first be empowered before it can meaningfully engage in a multi-stakeholder platform. Remember that inclusion is not about inviting everyone in the table, but about identifying who are excluded and making sure that they have the power to be included. Supposedly, the humanitarian interactions start with the assessment of the damage, the needs, and the capacity of the responding agency. To be quick and efficient, various templates and checklists have served as the standard during assessments. Such checklists often highlights the visible damage, the heard needs of the community from rushed consultations and coordination with the LGUs, and the tangible capacity of the responders. Often, this checklist is just a validation check if predetermined responses are relevant in specific communities. But we often fail to see the invisible damage, the unheard needs, and the intangible capacity of the responders. Surging external responders are often not able to see the historical context of the community, the depth of the damage in the community and individuals, the continuing threats on the community, the power and gender relationships within the community, and the pre-existing process of participatory development. We often fail to see who has access and control over community resources, the status of social networks and relationships, the root causes of vulnerability of the community's capacity to dream and hope, the special needs of the vulnerable sectors and those in geographically isolated and disadvantaged areas, and the capacity of affected communities to be agents of change. Unless we have existing partnerships, we fail to see the intangible capacity of local responders to negotiate with local stakeholders and donors, their sensitivity to power and gender relationships in the community, the trust of the vulnerable and marginalized sectors on them, their capacity to mobilize, capacitate, and enable empowerment, and their own adherence to the subsidiarity principle wherein they will step aside for more local organizations to take the lead in the response. We will realize that more local development institutions are better positioned to determine the invisible, the unheard, and the intangibles. Specifically, they are more appreciative of the need to build back better social capitals, which poor communities have relied on for survival and development. The linking of disaster response to development has long been a dilemma of humanitarian agencies. The dilemma starts with external institutions framing the context as if the community only started to exist after the disaster and the response project. For communities, development context has always been present and it has only been aggravated by the disaster. But sometimes humanitarian agencies see disaster response projects as standalone projects. Even the definition of participation by the Participation Revolution workstream of the Grand Bargain is confined to the response project, thus making participation as a transactional requirement. Participation must be viewed from the wider political agenda to empower the vulnerable and marginalized. In this worst-case scenario, a largely funded intervention that is blind to the existing power struggle and initiative of people's organizations and civil society can easily undermine decades of people-centered and community-driven development. This worst-case scenario is driven by the humanitarian messiah complex that vulnerable communities are weak, must be saved, and cannot lead. The goal of development-oriented civil society is to transform existing non-participatory development into participatory development using the disaster response. For this to materialize, there is a need to be purposive on the type of development that the humanitarian action can contribute to. Where communities are organized and conscientized, a disaster is just another issue faced by the community. It is even an opportunity for the community for capacity building, collective action, and rights claiming to be empowered to meet their needs and aspirations. Are we humble enough to not be consumed by the disaster, the response, and our own role to become strategic and open to participatory development, where informal settlers have tenurial security so that they can define their development using their people's plan, where women are not treated as just vulnerable sectors, but also as empowered leaders who can address the discrimination, invisibility, and violence they experience every day, where IDPs can claim and self-govern their peace zone that will be respected by warring parties. This is not just to link response to development. The goal is for participatory and community-driven development to shape the disaster response. In the coming days, you will hear the stories of various people's organizations. These organizations are exceptional and not the norm. They are not perfect, but they are continually working to develop their community. Listen to what they experienced and did, but more importantly, feel their power. Only then will we be able to appreciate the magnitude of the contribution of community organizing to the people. Maraming salamat.